Ruskin stared at the medal. It was so bright and beautiful it made his eyes sting. "And besides," Corky continued, "you deserve a medal for putting up with me. I'm so glad we're friends, my dear boy. I was lonely before I met you. Do you remember the first day we met?" "I was 7 years old," Ruskin said. "That's right," Corky said, smiling. "Your first day at St. George's. You walked in with Elvis Cave and Sparky Walnut." "We were all the same height then," Ruskin said. "All three of us were small, and we were the best of friends. We did everything together. We'd ride our bikes and talk about insects and jump over cracks in the pavement. We saw you sweeping the school playground. We rushed up to you and asked your name. And I told you it was Corky Pigeon. Elvis asked if you were a teacher," Ruskin said. "Me, a teacher," Corky said, chuckling to himself. "Can you imagine it? I don't even know the capital of Australia." "And I started to talk to you," Ruskin said. "It was you who got me interested in acting. You told me about all the plays you'd seen and how some actors made you laugh and cry. And one day, Mr. Lace overheard us talking, and you said, 'Shakespeare,'" interrupted Corky. "That's right," Ruskin said. "You said, 'Shakespeare,' and Mr. Lace started to cry. That's when I discovered Shakespearing Mr. Lace." "But you told Elvis," Corky said, frowning. "He was my friend then," Ruskin said. "I trusted him. I thought I could tell him everything. But it all changed. Because he started to grow. It seems that way. You gave me a football. Remember that, Corky?" "Yes, my dear boy," Corky replied. "It went da-boing when I bounced it. Elvis was really jealous. The next day, he just started to grow. He grew muscles, got bigger, and started to wear those padded shoulders and a helmet. And he stole your ball." "That's right. And Sparky, who used to be my friend, stopped talking to me and started following Elvis around everywhere, saying 'yes, sir' to everything Elvis said. And now I've got no friends. Except you, Corky." "And I've got no friends except you, Ruskin." They hugged each other. Corky's hair was very soft against Ruskin's cheek, like feathers, and Ruskin could feel the old man's heart beating through his clothes. Suddenly, Ruskin exclaimed, "But the cracks! Corky, the cracks! And the dark brick, and the holes and bumps in the road! You were going to tell me what caused them." "So I was, my dear boy," Corky said softly. There was a pause. "Go on, then," Ruskin urged. Corky took a biscuit and started to lick the chocolate. "It's quite a story," Corky said. "More strange than Elvis growing into the window smasher of Lizard Street. It's a story so strange you might not believe it." "I'll believe it," Ruskin said. "Tell me." "Well," Corky said, "you know when you sometimes feel a rumbling in the ground under Lizard Street, and people tell you it's a tube train going by beneath?" "Yes," Ruskin said. "Well, it's not a tube train," Corky said. "It's the thing that lives in the sewers. It's the thing that comes up through the largest drain in the street. It comes up at night, when we're asleep, and cracks pavements with its gigantic tail, scorching bricks with its fiery breath, and digging holes in roads with its sharp claws." "What is it?" Ruskin asked, breathlessly. "Krindlekrax," Corky replied. Corky dunked a chocolate biscuit in his tea and licked it thoughtfully. He licked it until all the chocolate had gone, then threw the biscuit away and took another from the packet. "What's Krindlekrax?" Ruskin asked. "To tell the story properly," Corky said, "I'll have to go back 10 years. 10 years? Ruskin said. "That's before I was born." "That's right. Corky said, wiping chocolate from his lips. 10 years ago, a lot of things were different. What things? Well, Corky said, the pavements weren't cracked, for one thing. And the brickwork wasn't dark, and the road didn't have holes and bumps in. Because Krindlekrax wasn't around then? Suggested Ruskin. That's right, Corky said, taking another biscuit from the packet. And I wasn't caretaker of St. George's School. You weren't? Ruskin said, amazed. Oh, I know what you think, Corky said, dunking the biscuit in his tea and starting to lick the chocolate. You think I've always been a caretaker, and I've always worn a white overall and had grey hair and walked with a walking stick. But that's not true. 10 years ago, my hair was black, and I walked without a limp, and I didn't work at St. George's School. So where did you work? Ruskin asked, sipping his tea. In the sewers, Corky replied. The sewers? Ruskin exclaimed, nearly dropping his cup. Yes, my dear boy, the sewers. Underground, where all the dirty water is, in the smelly dark. At least, that's how most people think of it. But I never thought of it like that. For me, it was beautiful. The walls are bright green, and the water makes a gentle trickling noise. There are chambers big as cathedrals, and waterfalls so high you can't see the top. And when you speak, your voice echoes round you 1,000,000 times until your ears ring and you get giddy. It's another world down there, and I loved everything about it. I felt like an explorer. Being down there was a true adventure for me, my dear boy. If it was dark, Ruskin said, how did you see? I'll show you, Corky replied. Corky got up and went over to a wardrobe. He opened the door, removed something wrapped in newspaper, then returned to the table. What's that? Ruskin asked. Open it and see, Corky said, handing it to him. The newspaper was very old and had turned yellow. It smelt of damp and dust. Carefully, Ruskin peeled away the paper, like peeling an onion, and inside he found a tin helmet with a torch stuck on the front. I wonder if it still works, Corky said, and he reached over and flicked a switch on top of the torch. The torch lit up. Corky took the helmet from Ruskin and put it on. The torch gleamed like a brilliant third eye. How do I look? Corky asked. Wonderful, Ruskin said. That's how I looked in those days, Corky said, sighing. I was younger, and I was wonderful, and I felt like an explorer in the underground world of green cathedrals and majestic waterfalls. So why did you leave? Ruskin asked. Why did you stop being an explorer and become a caretaker? Because, Corky replied, I was the one who found Krindlekrax. Ruskin shivered so violently he nearly dropped his cup. Are you cold, my dear boy? Asked Corky. No, I just... More tea? Asked Corky. No, Ruskin said. Are you ill? Just finish your story, cried Ruskin, in the closest his squeaky whisper of a voice could get to a shout. Tell me about Krindlekrax. Corky took a deep breath. One day, Corky said, I was underground when I heard a noise. A noise like I'd never heard before. A sort of crying sound. Eek, went the noise. I looked all around. My torch beam cut through the darkness, and there, on a ledge beside the trickling water, I saw something move. It was about the size of a shoe and bright green and had tiny sharp teeth. It was eating a slice of toast. What was it? Ruskin asked, staring at Corky and clutching the edge of his seat. A baby crocodile, my dear boy, Corky replied. But how did it get there? I never found that out. But there it was, bright green and munching toast. There was marmalade on the toast, and orange rind was stuck between the crocodile's teeth. There was something enticing about the tiny creature. I wanted to touch it, so I stepped forward. My feet went splash in the water, and the light from my torch shone in the animal's eyes, making them bright red. "Were you scared?" Ruskin asked. No, my dear boy. I just wanted to get closer to the crocodile, to feel its skin." Corky licked a chocolate biscuit for a while, then continued, "Slowly, I reached out. I could feel the crocodile's warm breath on my fingertips. And then, suddenly, the crocodile snapped its jaws shut. I managed to get my finger out of the way just in time. Clack went the jaws, like two bits of metal clanging together. I took a step back, slipped, and fell into the water. The water went up my nose and into my ears and made me cough and splutter, but I didn't have time to cough and splutter for long." "Why, Corky?" Ruskin asked. "Because the crocodile was already chasing after me," Corky replied. "I ran down the tunnel. The crocodile was very fast. I could hear its cracking jaws and the swish of its tail. I ran through the dirty water, hardly looking where I was going. I started to panic. For a moment, I thought I was lost. I would never find the ladder that led up to the surface again. 'Help!' I called. 'Help me, someone!' My voice echoed all around me, but no help came. No one could hear me. I was underground, my dear boy, and no living thing could hear me, except the crocodile." Ruskin interrupted. "Exactly," Corky said, "except the crocodile. But suddenly I saw the ladder. I grabbed it and started to climb. I was halfway up when I felt a terrible pain in my knee." Corky touched his leg, the one with the limp. "I looked down and saw the crocodile biting my knee. I shook my leg frantically, but the crocodile wouldn't let go. Its tiny jaws were clenched tight. Deeper and deeper its teeth went into my skin. I was yelling out. Finally, I hit the crocodile as hard as I could. It let go and fell back into the watery darkness. I heard it go splash." Corky poured himself another cup of tea. "That's thirsty work," Corky remarked, "all this storytelling." "So that's how you got your limp," Ruskin said. "Exactly, my dear boy," Corky said. "I went to hospital, and the doctor put a bandage round my knee and told me it'd be all right. But I wasn't. The crocodile had bitten through a tendon or something, and I had to use a walking stick." Corky picked up the packet of biscuits and looked inside. "There's only one left," he said. "Do you want it, my dear boy?" "No, you can have it," Ruskin replied. "Are you sure? I wouldn't want to cheat you of your share of the delicious chocolate." "I'm sure, Corky. Just tell me the rest of the story. Is that why you left your job underground and became a caretaker instead?" Almost," Corky replied, licking the biscuit. "But not quite. I stopped going underground, but I still worked for the same firm. They gave me a job in an office instead. I stayed there for a couple of years, and then one day a worker went sick, and they needed someone to go underground, in his place, to check a few leaks and rusty pipes. And you were the one who went," Ruskin said. "That's right," Corky said, his tongue covered with chocolate. "I put my helmet on, this very helmet with its torch, and went down into the darkness again." And you saw the crocodile again?" suggested Ruskin. "Or not at first," Corky said. "At first I didn't even think about it. I just concentrated on walking through the water without slipping over. And then I heard it." "What?" "A roar. A roar like I'd never heard before. Like a million car tires screeching all at once. It made my bones shake." "Were you scared?" Ruskin asked. "Very. Because you knew what it was." "That's right, my dear boy," Corky said, licking the last of the chocolate from the biscuit and throwing it away. "I knew that for 2 years the baby crocodile had been drinking the dirty water and eating the remains of food. I knew that it had been growing and growing. And I knew something else. I knew that biting my knee had given it a taste for me blood. I knew that it had been growing and waiting for me to return so it could finish me off once and for all." Ruskin leant forward and squeezed Corky's hand. "What did you do?" Ruskin asked, eyes wide. "Well, I didn't panic, my dear boy," Corky replied. "That's the worst thing to do. Never panic. So, slowly and calmly, I turned round and limped towards the ladder. I tried to be as quiet as possible. The splashing of my feet in the water sounded so loud to me. And then I heard it again. That terrible roar. I knew the crocodile was getting closer. Although it wasn't just a crocodile anymore, was it, Corky? Ruskin said. It had got another name. It was Krindlekrax, Corky said. I just knew that was its name. The roar of Krindlekrax filled me ears. I saw the ladder and reached out. I could hear splashing coming towards me. I knew Krindlekrax was getting closer and closer. I ran up the ladder, and in those last few moments, I glanced down to see what was chasing after me. What did it look like? Ruskin asked. Huge and dark, Corky replied, with pointed claws and sharp teeth and breath as hot as fire. It was the most terrible thing I had ever seen. Corky leant back and took his helmet off. When I got home that evening, he said, I saw that all me hair had turned white. The sight of Krindlekrax had drained the colour from me. So you left your job? Ruskin said. Corky nodded, saying, Yes, I left, me dear boy. I got a job at St. George's School, where you and I became friends. So, I can't complain too much. Ruskin smiled. But I'll tell you something, Corky continued. Some nights I know that Krindlekrax comes up through the largest drain in Lizard Street. I know it comes up and searches for me. And shall I tell you how I know? How? Ruskin asked. Because its heavy tail cracks the pavement, and its fiery breath scorches the bricks dark, and its claws put holes and bumps in the road. That's how I know. But it's never found you, Ruskin said, nervously. No, Corky replied, wrapping the old newspaper round the tin helmet, and it never will. Oh, don't let it, Ruskin cried, getting to his feet and hugging Corky. Don't let it get to you. You're the only friend I've got. There, me dear boy, Corky said, holding Ruskin very tight. Don't upset yourself. I'll never let Krindlekrax get me. I bolt all me doors and lock me windows and tuck myself in tight when I go to bed. I'm as safe as houses. If I ever see Krindlekrax, Ruskin said, I'll tame him, so you'll be safe forever. Ah, none of us is safe forever, Corky said. We can only be safe for a little while at a time. Ruskin was still clutching Corky's golden medal in his hand. I'm still curious about this, Ruskin said. Tell me why you got the medal. Oh, not now, Corky said. That's enough stories for one night. Is it anything to do with Krindlekrax? Ruskin asked. No, Corky replied. Is it anything... began Ruskin. It doesn't matter, interrupted Corky. Now you get yourself home, my dear boy. Your mum and dad'll be worried. It was dark outside. Clutching the medal tightly, Ruskin walked down Lizard Street towards his home. He looked at the cracks in the pavement and the holes in the road and the dark bricks and imagined Krindlekrax walking up and down Lizard Street, its huge tail cracking, its sharp claws digging, its hot breath scorching, looking for Corky Pigeon. He imagined Krindlekrax looking in through windows, peeping through curtains, watching people sleep and dream. Perhaps Krindlekrax had even seen him, Ruskin Splinter, curled up in his bed, and wondered who this small, thin, red-haired boy was, sleeping contentedly in a room full of actors' photographs. Ruskin stood on the large drain in front of his house. The metal drain cover wobbled from side to side. Ka-clunk went the drain cover. Ruskin thought, this is the largest drain in Lizard Street. It's from this drain that Krindlekrax rises when he's searching for Corky. Ruskin got to his knees and put his ear to the cold metal. He listened as hard as he could. For a while, he heard nothing. And then he heard it. A distant rumbling. The drain started to vibrate. The rumbling got louder and louder. So loud, Ruskin's knees started to tremble. It was Krindlekrax, down there in the sewer. It was stomping through endless corridors of water, through chambers as large as cathedrals and waterfalls as high as mountains. Ruskin got to his feet, brushed the dust from his knees, then looked up at his house. He noticed the window Elvis had smashed that morning had been covered with a sheet of newspaper. Nearly all of the windows were paper instead of glass now. Ruskin went inside. His mum and dad were sitting round the kitchen table eating baked beans on toast. His dad, Winston, was still in his pyjama bottoms and a white vest with holes in. The front of the vest was thick with baked bean and marmalade stains. "Kiss?" Wendy said. Ruskin kissed her cheek. "Tea?" she asked. "Yes, please," replied Ruskin. "Beans on toast?" "Yes, please." Every evening Wendy said, "Kiss," followed by "Tea," then "Beans on toast." And every evening Ruskin kissed her cheek and replied, "Yes, please," to both questions. Ruskin sat at the table. Winston's eyes were glued to the television set in the corner of the room. Someone on the screen was talking about the weather. "It's the hottest summer ever, lawns are turning brown, flowers are drying up, and we're running out of water." Ruskin said, "I wish we didn't have newspapers in our windows." "We can't afford to keep replacing the windows," Winston said, still staring at the television. "Now the worst thing Elvis can do is rip paper instead of smashing glass." "But it looks silly," Ruskin said. "It's not my fault," Winston said. "Oh, polly-wolly doodle all the day," Wendy said, handing Ruskin some tea and putting some bread in the toaster. "Don't make such a fuss." "You should get Elvis's dad to pay for it," Ruskin remarked. "Why don't you go and speak to him?" "I don't want to speak to Elvis's dad," Winston said. "Not now or ever. Besides, don't forget my motto. Don't interfere." Wendy poured Ruskin a cup of tea and asked, "Did you get the part of hero in the school play?" "No," Ruskin replied. "I said you wouldn't," Wendy said. "Fancy thinking a small, thin, red-haired boy like you with a squeaky whisper of a voice could pass for a handsome, tall, muscular, thunderous-voiced hero." The toast popped out of the toaster. Wendy buttered it, poured some baked beans on top, and handed it to Ruskin. "We have toast with everything," Ruskin said. "I love toast," Wendy said ecstatically. "But we can't eat all of it," Ruskin said, looking at his meal. "I mean, what happens to all the toast left over?" "I throw it away," Wendy said, staring at the television set. The person on the television was saying, "Paint is peeling, walls are cracking, people are getting sunstroke, drains are smelling." Ruskin asked, "Where do you throw all the toast?" "Down the drain, of course," Wendy replied. Ruskin looked at his mum. The light from the television set reflected in her eyes, making them look like car headlights. "Have you always thrown our uneaten toast down the drain?" he asked. "Always," Wendy replied. "The drain outside?" "Of course," Wendy said. "After all, it's the biggest drain in Lizard Street." Ruskin ate the rest of his meal in silence. Afterwards, he went up to his room and sat by the window. Now he knew why the baby crocodile had grown so big. Corky said that it had been eating toast when he first saw it, and that's what it had continued to do for 10 years. A daily diet of toast and butter, toast and marmalade, toast and baked beans, toast and poached egg, or scrambled egg, or fried egg, toast and tinned spaghetti. And the toast had made the crocodile big and strong, had given it a tail and sharp claws and fiery breath, had transformed it from a tiny, bright green baby, no bigger than a shoe, into a gigantic, dark monster that drained the colour from Corky's hair and nightly damaged Lizard Street. "I'm going to sit here all night," Ruskin said, looking out of the window. "I'm going to stay awake and wait for Krindlekrax." He stared down the length of Lizard Street. One by one, the lights in windows, what windows were still unsmashed by Elvis's ball, went out, and people went to bed. Ruskin knew the street so well. He looked at Mr. Lace's house, with its window box full of marigolds. He looked at Dr. Flower's house, from where came the sound of the hay-fevered doctor sneezing in his sleep. He looked at Sparky Walnut's house, where no doubt Mrs. Walnut hoped her shop window would not be broken again by a sleepwalking Elvis. He looked at Corky's house, where Corky was tucked up tightly, his windows locked, doors bolted, protecting himself from Krindlekrax. He looked at the pub, the Dragon and the Golden Penny, where Mr. and Mrs. Cave smoked endless cigars and Elvis lay in bed, his ball cradled in his arms. And he looked at the school at the other end of the street. The school, with its turrets and railings, was like a gigantic castle against the moonlit, star-filled sky. Ruskin took the medal from his pocket. There was a pin attached to the medal, so it could be pinned on the owner. The medal gleamed in the moonlight. The light reflected in Ruskin's eyes and made him feel tired. Ruskin closed his eyes for a while. He must have fallen asleep, because suddenly he heard a noise and jumped up. At first he thought it was Krindlekrax. Then he realized it wasn't. Da-boing went the noise. It was Elvis's football. Ruskin peered down Lizard Street. There, at the other end, Elvis was sleepwalking and bouncing the ball. Even though Elvis was in his pyjamas, he still wore his American football helmet, and the shoulders to his pyjamas were padded. The moonlight made Elvis's shadow very long. It ran down the whole length of Lizard Street. Da-boing went the ball. It was the only sound in Lizard Street, and it echoed from building to building. "What a nasty boy you are," thought Ruskin, watching Elvis. "You grow 3 times as big and steal my ball, and you smash all our windows." Suddenly, the ball struck a bump in the road and bounced off at an angle. The ball hit Mr. Lace's window. Smash went the window. One by one, the windows of Lizard Street lit up as people struggled out of bed. The first on the street was Mr. Lace. Although he was wearing a long white nightshirt, he still had his scarf round his neck and pencils in his hair. There was a pencil in his mouth as well, confirming the rumour that Mr. Lace sucked a pencil in his sleep like babies suck a dummy. "My window!" cried Mr. Lace, waving his hands in the air. Then he looked at the window boxes. A few of the marigolds had been damaged by the ball. "My flowers!" Mr. Lace cried. "My beautiful flowers!" Other people were in the street now. Mr. Flick in his jet-black dressing gown with a velvet collar, Mrs. Walnut in a pink potato-smelling dressing gown, Mr. and Mrs. Cave still smoking cigars, Dr. Flowers with a paper handkerchief stuck to his face. They all stood round Mr. Lace and tried to comfort him as he bemoaned the state of his window boxes. "It's a terrible," said Mr. Flick. "Outrageous," said Mrs. Walnut. "Disgraceful," said Dr. Flowers. "You're lucky," Mrs. Walnut said. "He's broken my shop window 6 times now." "And my window 7 times," said Mr. Flick. Ruskin's mum and dad were peering from behind their front door. "He keeps breaking our windows too," called Wendy. "Shh," said Winston, closing the door. "Don't interfere." Mr. Cave put his arms round Elvis and said, "Look how innocent he is. He doesn't even know what he's doing." "Oh, poor little Elvie baby," said Mrs. Cave. Everyone in the street stared at Elvis. "Now then," Mr. Cave said, "give him his ball back, otherwise he'll be upset in the morning, and you wouldn't want that to happen. You know how many windows Elvis smashes when he gets upset." Mr. Lace bit a pencil in half and went inside to get Elvis's ball. "It's a terrible," said Mr. Flick. "Outrageous," said Mrs. Walnut. This, disgraceful, said Dr. Flowers. Mr. Lace returned with the ball and gave it to Elvis. As soon as it was in Elvis's hands, he started to bounce it. Da-boing! Mr. and Mrs. Cave led Elvis back to the pub and locked the door. The people of Lizard Street looked at each other in silence for a while. Then they shrugged their shoulders, sighed, and went to bed. All except Mr. Lace, that is. He got a broom and started sweeping the broken glass. Corky came out of his house and helped Mr. Lace sweep the glass into a bin bag. He's a nuisance, that boy, Mr. Lace said, wiping tears from his eyes. Even in his sleep he scares us, said Corky. Once all the glass was swept away, Mr. Lace went into his house and locked the door. Corky stood alone in the street for a while. He glanced up and saw Ruskin sitting in his window. Corky waved his stick in the air. Ruskin waved back. Corky went inside and locked his door. Ruskin sat for a while, waiting for Krindlekrax. But gradually, weariness overcame him, and he knew he had to go to bed. He changed into his pyjamas, looked at the golden medal, then closed the window. Good night, Lizard Street, he said. The next morning, in school, rehearsals started on the play The Boy Hero. Elvis, holding a plastic sword and shield, and clutching his football under his arm, stood in front of the chicken wire and cardboard dragon. Mr. Lace watched from behind the piano. All right, Mr. Lace said. Begin your speech, Elvis. Elvis took a deep breath. Oh, you terrible monster, Elvis began in a voice that, despite being loud and thunderous, was flat and emotionless. You scary thing of... you scary thing of Elvis had forgotten his lines. Dark, prompted Mr. Lace. Dark, Elvis exclaimed. You scary thing of the dark. You will scare us. No. Elvis had forgotten his lines again. No more, Mr. Lace prompted. No more, Elvis exclaimed. You will scare us no more. I am not afraid, Mr. Lace prompted. Afraid, Elvis exclaimed. I am not afraid. Elvis's voice trailed into silence. Mr. Lace came out from behind the piano. Well, he said to Elvis, you'll be all right once you've learned the lines, I suppose. Elvis put down his sword and shield and started bouncing the ball. Da-boing, da-boing. I'm going to be the best actor in the world, Elvis said. Yes, Mr. Lace said, sucking a pencil. The whole class thinks that, don't we, class? Everyone in the class said, Yes, Mr. Lace. Everyone except Ruskin, that is. Ruskin didn't say yes, Elvis said. Mr. Lace looked at Ruskin. Oh, but I'm sure he meant to say yes, Mr. Lace said. Didn't you mean to say yes, Ruskin? No, Ruskin replied. I didn't. You didn't? Mr. Lace said. No, Ruskin said. I think Elvis is the worst actor I've ever seen. He's just saying the words, but he's not feeling anything. I didn't believe a word of it. Silence. Mr. Lace stared at Ruskin. Elvis bounced the ball. Da-boing. What's more, Ruskin continued, he doesn't know how to hold a shield and sword properly. Oh, dear, Mr. Lace said. Da-boing. And he doesn't know how to breathe properly, Ruskin continued. Oh, dear, said Mr. Lace. Elvis was trembling with anger now. Da-boing, da-boing. And he doesn't speak properly, Ruskin said. The sound of the bouncing ball got louder and louder. Da-boing, da-boing. And he shouldn't hold that ball under his arm when he's supposed to be acting, Ruskin said. Da boing! The ball bounced up to the ceiling, struck a light bulb, and went straight through a window. Smash went the window. Elvis pointed at Ruskin and growled, "You're not gonna get away with that, you silly little Splinter. I'm gonna smash your living room windows, your bathroom windows, your hallway windows. I'm even gonna smash the glass in your silly glasses. I'm gonna smash so much glass around you, you're not gonna be able to walk without crunching." "No, no," said Mr. Lace, trying to calm Elvis down. "No need to get offensive." "Oh, Shakespeare!" Elvis snapped. Tears came into Mr. Lace's eyes. "Oh, that wondrous name," Mr. Lace said. "The bard of all time." "Shakespeare," said Elvis. Mr. Lace fell to his knees. "Oh, the joy of the thought," he said, wiping tears from his eyes. "The fountains of emotion contained in that single name. Shakespeare, Shakespeare, Shakespeare," Elvis continued. Mr. Lace was lying on his back on the floor now, weeping so much his scarf became soggy with tears. "I'm gonna get my football now," Elvis said, suddenly tired of tormenting Mr. Lace. Elvis left the classroom. After school, Ruskin helped Corky sweep up the broken glass from the school playground. "Before long," Corky said, "Lizard Street won't be called Lizard Street anymore. It'll be known as the Street of Broken Windows." Ruskin told Corky how Elvis had threatened to break his glasses as well as all his windows. "Are you scared, me boy?" Corky asked, sweeping the glass into a neat pile. "A little bit," Ruskin replied, brushing the glass into a bin bag. "Well, there's nothing wrong with being scared," Corky said, picking up the bag. "We all get scared sometimes." They took the bag over to a big metal bin and threw it inside. "There, come on, my boy," Corky said. "Let's forget all about Elvis and his bad acting and his ball and his glass-smashing threats. Let's go and see the film at Mr. Flick's Dream Palace. Would you like that?" "Yes, please," Ruskin said. "And we'll buy some biscuits on the way." So they bought a packet of chocolate biscuits at Mrs. Walnut's shop and went to the cinema. They sat in the front row. The cinema was dark and smelt of popcorn. The seats were covered with red velvet, and there were bright orange curtains in front of the screen. Corky opened the biscuits and offered one to Ruskin. "I hope people don't talk during the film," Corky said. "I think that's a terrible thing to do." The orange curtains parted, and the screen exploded with light. Ruskin tingled with excitement. He reached out for a biscuit. The film was called Henry V and was in black and white. It was very exciting. Ruskin loved the charging horses and the whooshing sound the arrows made as they flew through the air. Suddenly, Ruskin heard another noise. It was coming from the back of the cinema. Da-boing went the noise. Ruskin looked behind him and saw Elvis Cave sitting next to Sparky Walnut. The two of them were laughing and giggling and jeering at the film. Elvis was bouncing his football. "Shh," Ruskin said. "Free country," Elvis said. "Can do what I like, can't I, Sparky?" "Yes, sir," said Sparky. Corky turned round and waved his walking stick at Elvis and Sparky. "It's bad manners," Corky said. "Da-boing," was the only reply. Ruskin and Corky faced the front again and tried to enjoy the film, but all they could hear was the relentless da-boing of Elvis's football. Mr. Flick walked down the aisle holding a torch. The beam cut a neat white line through the dark like an electric finger. He pointed it at Elvis. "Please be quiet," Mr. Flick said, straightening his bow tie. "This is such a good film. Can't you hear the wonderful language?" "It's not English," Elvis said. "I don't understand a word of it. It's all rubbish. Right, Sparky?" "Yes, sir," Sparky said. "But it is English," Mr. Flick said. "It's the most wonderful English. It's by Shakespeare." "Then Shakespeare can't write," Elvis said. Mr. Flick looked shocked. And it's boring, Elvis continued, standing up. He started to walk down the aisle towards the screen, bouncing the ball in front of him. Lots of silly actors in silly costumes and saying a lot of silly old twaddle, Elvis said. The boing, please, Mr. Flick said. Is this what you call good acting? Elvis asked, looking at Ruskin. Well, you're an idiot. I'm a better actor than all those silly idiots up there. And he bounced the ball as hard as he could. The ball shot into the air and ripped through the screen. A large black hole appeared where the actor's head should have been. Elvis screamed with laughter. Sparky screamed with laughter too. Mr. Flick just screamed. Elvis and Sparky ran out of the cinema, and Mr. Flick stopped the film and turned the lights on. Ah, my poor screen, said Mr. Flick, running his fingers up and down his black velvet lapels. Now I want to be able to show any more films. Elvis's football is smashing everything in sight, Corky said. Everyone in Lizard Street spends most of their time sweeping up broken glass. He's such a wild boy. Somebody's got to do something, said Mr. Flick. It can't just go on like this. Elvis is terrorizing everyone, even his own mom and dad, and no one seems prepared to do anything. Corky and Ruskin left Mr. Flick's cinema and walked home. It was late evening now, and the sun was setting, turning the sky bright red and yellow, with a few glimmering stars visible. Corky, Ruskin said, are the actors in that film still alive? Well, some of them are, Corky replied, and some of them aren't. I want to live for always, Ruskin said. No one lives for always, Corky said. We just live for a little while. Corky stopped outside his front door and watched Ruskin walk the rest of the way home. Ruskin stood on the metal drain in front of his house. Clunk went the drain. Ruskin turned to wave at Corky. A breeze blew down Lizard Street. Eek went the pub sign. Corky waved back. Clunk went the drain. Ruskin went indoors. His mum and dad were eating toast and watching television. Kiss? Said Wendy. Ruskin kissed her cheek. Tea? Asked Wendy. Yes, please, replied Ruskin. Beans on toast? Yes, please. Later, after Wendy and Ruskin had gone to bed, Winston sat up, drinking cans of lager. He was still sitting up and staring at the television set when all the programs had gone off, and there was nothing on the screen but a grey fuzz. Upstairs in his room, Ruskin, who had been reading, could hear the telly buzzing and fuzzing. He knew that his dad had got drunk, as this happened quite often, so he went downstairs. Come on, Dad, said Ruskin, shaking Winston. Time for bed. Usually, this is all Ruskin had to do. Shake his dad, take the lager from his hand, and say, Time for bed. And Winston would obediently stand up, mutter, It's not my fault, a few times, and go up to his room. But tonight was different, because as Ruskin took the lager from his dad's hand, Winston said, The crocodile? Ruskin stared at his dad. Again, Winston said, The crocodile? Winston shook him. What crocodile, Dad? Asked Ruskin. The one I took, mumbled Winston. Took from where, Dad? From the zoo. Winston continued to talk in his drunken sleep. And so it was that Ruskin learnt why his dad had been sacked from his job as zookeeper, and how the baby crocodile that bit Corky's knee and grew to become Krindlekrax got into the sewer in the first place.